Often, when a person goes missing, it happens quickly. A little girl is playing with friends when they lose sight of her, or she gets off the school bus and never makes it home. A dad mows the lawn and is never seen again. But sometimes, a disappearance is gradual, with multiple sightings and clues that seemingly lead everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Bryce Laspisa was 19 years old when he got into his car and drove away from his girlfriend's apartment after breaking up with her. His own apartment was 90 miles away, but he never made it home. But he didn't just vanish. Between August 28th and August 30th, 2013, Bryce was seen by multiple people, including law enforcement, and he spoke to his parents on the phone several times. But ultimately, Bryce's car and belongings were found, but there has been no trace of the young man nearly 8 years later, and this case has reached the level of infamous. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell the stories of those who never came home. I want to tell you the story of Bryce Laspisa. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. All right, welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. I just want to say I like the homage to our previous cases in that intro.
Did you like that?
Yeah.
Could you pick out each one
I
in
could.
there? Yeah.
Yeah, which was really weird because I have a terrible memory.
You do. Thank you for joining us once again. You know, we tend to cover less well-known cases on this podcast because one of my goals is to amplify the stories that don't get a lot of media attention. Plus, you know, selfishly, I also worry about a case that's been done by a bunch of other podcasts because I don't necessarily want the comparisons, to be quite honest. But this is a case that's so weird that I just wanted to talk to you about it. Because even though a lot of the true crime fans who are listening right now may be like, oh my God, we know all about this case. Like, I know you don't.
Nope. No idea.
And also, Bryce is still a person who is missing and we still need answers, you know? And so, yes, it's been covered a lot more than many of our other cases, but he's still not home. And this isn't just entertainment, you know?
Right.
It's important to get these stories out there because even though it's been done before, a lot of people listening right now have not heard of Bryce Laspisa. That's not a name that they know. It's not a name you know.
No, yeah, I was going to say, including me. I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, so let's get his story out there even more because you never know who could be listening and who could possibly know something and have some small little piece of information that could help.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. Bryce David Laspisa was born on April 30th, 1994 in Naperville, Illinois to Karen Laspisa. Now, I don't know who Bryce's biological father is, but it doesn't sound like he was ever actually involved in Bryce's life. Bryce's dad, David Laspisa, adopted him when he was 2 years old and raised him along with Karen. Bryce was their only child, and by most accounts, he had a close relationship with his parents, especially his mom. Bryce was a decent student. He had a lot of friends. You know, he was described as being very charismatic. And you knew when he walked into a room because this dude was 5'11" and had bright red hair. Bright red.
Like Carrot Top?
Yeah, like Ron Weasley. Yes. Red hair. So you couldn't miss him, you know? He was tall, he had this infectious personality, had this bright red hair, everybody knew who Bryce was, And he was an athlete too in high school. He played both football and baseball. So he did pretty well in school. I mean, not like top of his class or anything, but he got solid grades. He had friends. So it seems like he had a pretty above average high school life, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Bryce graduated from Naperville Central High School in 2012. So after this, interestingly, his parents apparently decided that they had had enough of Chicago and like the weather and everything that comes with living in the Midwest. And so they decided to move to Laguna Niguel, California.
Oh.
Yeah. And
okay.
Laguna Niguel is located in Orange County, California. So I'm absolutely going to stereotype this place and say it is 100% as depicted in both the OC, classic show,
and Laguna Beach.
Exactly.
I got a reference.
You got it.
You
got it. You knew something.
I didn't even see that show. I did see the OC though a lot.
Oh yeah, because it was the greatest show.
Yeah.
So it's basically very fancy schmancy.
Fancy schmancy. That's a technical term.
Yeah, obviously. And, probably a pretty good place to retire. Like, especially if you like yoga lattes. That was an OC reference.
Okay, now you lost me.
I'm just saying Peter Gallagher saying yoga lattes over and over again is one of the greatest things that show gave to us.
Okay.
Yoga lattes.
Guess I missed that part of the show.
We'll do a rewatch. It's fine. I've got the DVDs. Anyway, the story of Bryce Laspisa is one, like I mentioned in the intro, that has been told on many true crime podcasts. It was also an episode of Disappeared. In short, it has more publicity than the majority of cases that we've covered. And we talk a lot about publicity surrounding missing persons cases on this show. And obviously, the hierarchy is missing white girls.
Yep.
Then pretty missing white women. Like if you're above 18 and white, like you also have to be hot in order to get the media attention.
Mm-hmm.
But missing white male teenagers honestly don't get a ton of play in the media.
You also said he went missing when he was 19.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was also, yes, still a teen, but
an
technically
adult.
Legally an adult.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So it's harder for adults to get, to get coverage unless you're a white lady. He did get coverage at the time, I think because mainly the circumstances behind his disappearance were so abnormal. If it was a situation, like so many others that we've covered of college students where they're there one day, they're gone the next, whatever, I don't think it would have gotten nearly the coverage that this has. But this case has endured because it is so strange and it takes so many twists and turns and seemingly doesn't make sense at all. The case itself is like a slow motion car wreck because, as I mentioned, it takes place over 3 days, basically. Like this disappearance isn't you lose sight of somebody and then they're gone, like we've covered so many times before. 3 days is how long it took Bryce to disappear. And it's ironic that this case is like a slow motion car wreck because this case also literally involves a slow motion car wreck.
Okay, enough teasers. I want to get into this now. You've piqued my curiosity. So
okay, good. Well, I make this aside to mention the first thing that I find odd, which is rarely mentioned as something strange in anything I've seen or read about this case. And that's where Bryce went to college. So Bryce was a 19-year-old college student at the time of his disappearance. He was an artist. In fact, he was majoring in graphic and industrial design. Since Laguna Niguel is in a metro area, and that's, again, where his parents lived,
right.
Right after high school, he moved with them. They have many colleges nearby, like Saddleback College and the Laguna College of Art and Design. But Bryce didn't go to those. And maybe that's because he didn't get in, or he didn't want to go to college like right where his parents lived. There are plenty of reasons why he wouldn't want to go to school there. He also grew up in Illinois. That's where he graduated high school from. That's where all of his friends were. So it would also stand to reason that maybe he would want to go back there for college, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't do that either. Instead, Bryce went to community college, which totally valid. Like, that's a very valid plan. He was planning on doing that for 2 years and then transferring to a 4-year university to finish his bachelor's degree, as many people do. Again, all this is totally normal.
So which community, though?
Well, that's the odd part. He didn't do what most kids do, which is attend a community college near their home and either live with their parents or get an apartment. Instead, he decided to attend school at Sierra College in Rocklin, which is north of San Francisco and about an 8-hour drive from Laguna Niguel. So like the complete opposite end of the state.
I guess he just wanted to get out on his own?
I mean, I guess, but to my knowledge, neither Bryce nor his family had any connection to Sierra College or to Rocklin. So like, how did he even find some random community college in Northern California?
Maybe it had a connection to a 4-year school that he wanted to get into.
Well, and that's what I was thinking. And so I tried to research that a little bit, and I couldn't find anything like that. Like, I couldn't find anything about it being a feeder school to, some art school or anything. Because again, that does happen too. Like, there are some community colleges that have partnerships with 4-year universities. So if you go to the community college, your credits will transfer seamlessly.
Right.
And that may be the case. I couldn't find anything that indicated that, though. Weirdly, what I did find is that Sierra College is the alma mater of Joseph D'Angelo, who is better known as the Golden State Killer.
Okay. Unrelated to this case.
Yeah, completely unrelated to this case, but just a weird thing that I came across as I was researching that. I don't know what made him pick Sierra College, but he was going to school approximately 8 hours away from his house. Now, Bryce did his freshman year there, and then he came back to Laguna Niguel for the summer.
Right.
When our story really starts, it's August of 2013, and Bryce is getting ready to start his second year at Sierra College. He has an apartment up there that he shared with a roommate, and he had a girlfriend named Kim, who he started dating the previous school year. I mean, things seem to be going well. Like, an apartment, a girlfriend, starting your sophomore year.
And you said the girlfriend was 90 miles away from his apartment?
Yeah. So we'll talk about that a little bit more.
In between his parents' house?
No.
I mean, not...
Even further north.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He had spent the summer down in Laguna Niguel, and, there are no reports of any problems or anything like that leading up to his return to school to start his sophomore year. According to his parents, the summer was very ordinary. Like, he even took an English class while he was back home for the summer just to get more credits toward earning his degree.
And one would assume that he probably didn't have a whole lot of friends in the area since they just moved.
Right, yeah.
So probably a few here and there, but...
Yeah, probably,
maybe.
But I'm sure not like a huge support system, right? I would assume that the majority of his friends in California were up at school.
Yeah.
In everything that I've read and seen, I haven't run into any mention of any Laguna Niguel friends of his. So I'm sure they existed, but they don't really seem to play a big part in any of this.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a really good point. So Bryce drove back up to school about 2 weeks before the fall semester started. Classes that year began on August 26th, so likely he had to start paying rent on August 1st. So, why not go back 2 weeks before classes start? You've got your apartment, you can get situated, you can see friends, you can hang out.
Have some parties.
Exactly,
whatever.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, be out of your parents' house and, have some time before you get back into the daily grind of classes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like what it sounds like he did. I mean, he hung out with his girlfriend, his friends, he played video games, like he did normal college stuff. But soon after Bryce returned to school, his friends started noticing that he was acting a little off. Now, they hadn't seen him in a few months, but the Bryce who came back to Rockland wasn't the Bryce that had left. According to his friends, Bryce had started drinking a lot. He was also not acting like himself personality-wise. It was so bad, in fact, that his roommate called Bryce's mother. Now, you were roommates in college with your best friend, and his mom was like another mom to you. You knew her very well. And, for years prior to college, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so because they had just moved to California, I don't know how well his roommate knew Bryce's mom, but certainly not for years.
Yeah.
How bad would it have had to get for you to call George's mom when you guys were sophomores in college? And I know you weren't both sophomores together and you didn't live together at that time, but hypothetically.
I mean, fast forward 1 year and we were living together.
Right.
So it would have, really bad. Like potential.
And you had a relationship with her, you knew her.
Yeah, she was my second mom.
Exactly. So you would have felt comfortable talking to her, I would assume, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But how bad would it have had to have gotten?
I wouldn't want to narc on my best friend for developing a drinking habit. So I mean, if it was that bad, I mean, that's pretty bad.
Right. I have to imagine. I mean, that to me was the first thing that really, really struck me when I first heard about this case. Like, a college kid's roommate called his mom because he was worried. Like, that's not just
worried about his drinking.
Yeah. And about the way he was acting. Because it wasn't just the drinking. The drinking was a big part of it. And I do think if it was just the drinking, then he would have just let it go or he was just acting so unlike himself that he called. So right now we're talking about Tuesday, August 27th, 2013. This is the second day of classes. Bryce called his mother the day before and had what seemed like a normal conversation. Like, he told her all about the classes he had taken that day, just things like that, like normal starting the new school year stuff. According to her, there was nothing odd about that call on Monday. But the next day, Tuesday, Bryce started texting with his girlfriend, Kim, and he broke up with her.
Just out of the blue?
Yeah. And so out of the blue to the point that Kim didn't even realize what was happening. They were texting and, I don't have a lot of what they were texting, but at one point he texted her something to the effect of, "You'll be better off without me." And Kim was like, "Wait, are you breaking up with me? What does that even mean?" And he said, "Yes, I am." Again, they had just gotten back to school. He had been back for 2 weeks. So this really seemingly came out of absolutely nowhere. So on Tuesday, Bryce breaks up with his girlfriend. And on Wednesday, August 28th, his roommate Sean calls his mother. Now, I don't know if this information came out in that call or if it came out later or exactly what the timeline is for what Sean said in that first call and what he eventually tells Karen, Bryce's mom. But he does tell Karen at some point that Bryce started acting strange after he and another friend had decided to stay up all night and play video games. In addition to drinking, Bryce took a drug called Vyvanse. Now, this isn't a drug I had ever heard of. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Yeah, okay. It's prescribed to people with ADHD, so kind of like Ritalin.
Okay.
So if you have ADHD, it helps you focus. But if you don't, as the detective put it in the Disappeared episode, it's basically meth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So a few hours after Karen got off the phone with Sean and started to really kind of understand that something weird is going on up in Rockland, she got another phone call. This time it was Bryce. He was at Kim's place. Kim is his girlfriend who he had broken up with the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is 90 miles north of his apartment.
Right.
I don't know how Bryce and Kim met. Just as an aside, I had assumed that they went to school together, but she lived 90 miles north up in Chico. 90 miles is a very long commute to community college.
Yeah, for sure.
So like, I don't know. I mean, it was 2013. I guess dating apps like were kind of a thing. I have no idea. But in any case, that's where he was. And so he calls his mom from Kim's house and he's agitated. And, you know, they had broken up the day before, so that makes sense. But they had broken up over text the day before. So what it sounds like is this is the whole come see me in person and we can talk about this type of thing. You know, like I'm not going to let you just break up with me over text because we've been dating for a year or however long it was.
Sure.
During this conversation that Bryce has with his mom from Kim's apartment, Kim gets on the phone and she tells Karen that she's worried about Bryce. Kim says that he's not acting like himself at all. And she actually thinks that Bryce is under the influence. So she took his keys to keep him from getting behind the wheel.
Smart move.
Well, yeah, except Bryce denies this. He says that he's totally fine, he's not under the influence, and that Kim just can't like accept the fact that he's breaking up with her and she's just trying to get him to stay. For Karen's part, Bryce sounds upset, but otherwise like himself. So she kind of buys that explanation and convinces Kim to give his keys back. But let's pause for a moment here and talk about this phone call because we had to pause to talk about what it would take for you to call your roommate's mom. But like, what would it take for you to get into a fight with your college girlfriend and then call your parents in the middle of it?
I can't imagine ever doing that.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
I can't imagine a situation in which that would even occur to me.
Well, I mean, maybe he had a better relationship with his mom as a confidant when it came to relationships than me or you.
Well, yeah. And I think that's true because, again, she said in interviews that they were very close. And yeah, I feel like you have to be pretty close for that to even cross your mind in a situation like this. Like,
Yeah.
that never would have occurred to me in any situation.
No, me either.
So Karen thought that Bryce was totally fine to drive. He just kind of needed to get out of that situation. But he did tell her that he had a lot that he wanted to talk to her and his dad about. She didn't really know what that meant because, like, again, she had just seen him 2 weeks ago. School had just started 2 days ago. And she was like, what could have possibly like happened? I just saw you. Like, we just talked on Monday. Everything seemed fine.
Yeah.
But that night had obviously been stressful for him. And, you know, he was far away from his apartment. So Karen just told him to get home and get some sleep and they would talk in the morning. Karen was concerned about Bryce at this point, but not like overly concerned or panicking or anything like
sure.
that.
He just went through a breakup and...
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure she just kind of chalked it up to just like teenage drama and love and stress and, you know, like just normal stuff that everybody goes through. And so she, like I said, I mean, she said he'll go to sleep. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Everything will be fine. But Karen didn't hear from Bryce the next morning after he woke up. She actually heard from him much sooner than that. Bryce called her at 1 a.m., and he apparently left Kim's house a little bit before 11:30. So 1 a.m., like, he could have theoretically had just gotten home.
Right.
You know, so when Karen talked to him, she was like, oh, okay, like he's calling me to tell me that I got home fine, like, cool, whatever. But interestingly, Karen doesn't say publicly what she and Bryce talked about during that 1 a.m. phone call. Like, she says that they had it, and I don't know what she told police, you know, I don't know what she said to them or anything like that, but in any of her interviews, including that disappeared episode, she never says what was said during that conversation. But interestingly, it doesn't seem as though she knew that Bryce was not home when he made that call. It seems like she assumed he was home and didn't find out until the next day that he wasn't.
So where was he?
Well, he wasn't home and he wasn't sleeping. Later, cell phone records would show that Bryce was still driving at 1 a.m. and, in fact, had driven past his apartment and was still heading south. The next morning, Thursday, August 29th, Karen received another phone call, but this time it was from her car insurance company. Bryce had apparently called for roadside assistance in Buttonwillow, California.
Where the hell is that?
Exactly. Karen didn't know. I'll tell you that much. Buttonwillow is a tiny town that's basically best known for having a truck stop. It's also a straight shot from Chico, where Kim lived, down I-5, but it's about 345 miles south of Chico. So he overshot his apartment by over 250 miles.
So was this a place that was like in between his apartment and Laguna?
Yes.
Okay.
So all of
so
it.
In theory, he's going home.
In theory, yeah. So all of this is directly down I-5. So I-5 in California, for the purposes of his route, it's Chico, where Kim lived, Rockland, where he lived, Buttonwillow, where she gets this call, and then Laguna Niguel. So just all down I-5.
Okay.
But instead of driving about an hour and a half home, Bryce drove over about 5.5 hours that night. Or at least if he drove in a straight line, he would have driven for about 5.5 hours. But that doesn't seem to have actually been the case. If Bryce had just left Kim's house and kept driving, he would have gotten to Buttonwillow sometime around 5 a.m., give or take. But Bryce made that roadside assistance call at 9 a.m. because he ran out of gas. The person who came to give Bryce gas was a man named Christian who worked at a local auto repair place. He delivered 3 gallons of gas to Bryce around 9:30 a.m. One way to look at this is that Bryce drove to Buttonwillow, got there around 5 or, whenever he would have gotten there, and then ran out of gas. The repair place probably didn't open until 9, so that's why he waited so long to call. And that could very well be the simple explanation. But there are a few things that kind of make me question that. One is the fact that he didn't call his parents. This seems like a dude who calls his parents when he's in trouble or when he needs help or just any time, really.
Mm-hmm.
But not only did he not call them, but when they tried to call him that morning, he didn't pick up. Another issue is that Bryce was at a rest stop. It does sound like this is a rest stop, like not the kind with a gas station.
Okay.
Just the kind maybe with like vending machines and bathrooms.
Mm-hmm.
But he was very close to like a truck stop and, gas stations basically. So if he had been driving with a purpose, like I'm just going to drive straight home tonight instead of going to my apartment, you would think that he would have realized that he was low on gas and stopped. And, he was also on the interstate the whole time, presumably.
Sure.
The whole thing is I-5. So there would have been plenty of other places to stop on the way, but he didn't. And so my thought on this is that Bryce was upset. He left Kim's probably intending to go home to his apartment, but instead just kept on driving. He continued to drive, but I don't think he stayed on the interstate that whole time. I think he either drove around aimlessly for a while or was just sitting somewhere with the car on and didn't realize that he was running out of gas.
Yeah, or maybe he had decided to go to his mom's house and got tired and pulled over somewhere to sleep and left the car running.
Right, yeah. And that would be good because sleep is one thing that we're not sure happened
Mm-hmm.
during this.
Yeah.
And I think that does contribute to this story, is the possible sleep deprivation involved. So at this point, it's close to noon on August 29th, and it's about, 12 hours since he left Kim's apartment. And Bryce's parents are trying to piece together like where their son has been since they last spoke. So they call the repair shop because Bryce had used a credit card that, they had given him at this repair shop. So they called the repair shop and they actually talked to Christian, the guy who gave him the gas. And so he says, yeah, I saw Bryce. I delivered him gas. I gave him 3 gallons at around 9:30 this morning. But, Christian didn't really like talk to him much or anything like that, or think that anything was too weird. He probably just thought he was some dumb kid who didn't know how to read a gas gauge.
Yeah, I mean, it's a normal call.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm sure Christian went deliver the gas, did not think about it at all, and wouldn't have thought about it at all until, Bryce's mom called him.
Right.
But he could tell that Bryce's parents were concerned. So Christian actually offered to go back to where he last saw Bryce to see if he was still there. And so Christian got back to the rest stop at around noon. And sure enough, Bryce was still there. He was sitting in the same place he had been sitting 3 hours earlier when Christian delivered the gas. At this point, even Christian's like, all right, something's going on here. This is weird. So he calls Karen back and goes to Bryce and puts Bryce on the phone. And Karen's like, what the hell is happening? Like, what are you doing? And he's like, nothing. So, this is concerning, obviously, because again, it's been over 12 hours and her kid has just been driving aimlessly, seemingly.
Or not driving.
Driving/sitting for 12 hours off of the interstate. But the silver lining is that at this point, he's only about 3 hours away from their house in Laguna Niguel. So she tells him to go fill up the tank and just come home. He's got his 3 gallons of gas, but she's like, just go to the truck stop, fill it up, come home. We'll deal with whatever is happening. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on, but you're 3 hours away. Just get here. And Bryce agrees, but he doesn't go home. So 3 hours later, when he doesn't show up, Karen calls him. Now, this is the beginning of Labor Day weekend. So she thinks, okay, well, maybe he's stuck in traffic. Maybe this 3-hour drive is actually not really a 3-hour drive today. But Bryce doesn't answer. She calls and she calls, but he still doesn't answer. And this goes on for hours. By 6 p.m., there's still no sign of Bryce, and his parents still can't get a hold of him. So now they're panicking.
Yeah, I mean, that's... Yeah, this whole scenario just is bonkers.
Yeah, it is. And so they're like, literally, is he dead in a ditch somewhere? So they don't know. They call the Orange County, which is where they are. So they call the Orange County Sheriff's Department and file a missing persons report. Now, instead of blowing them off because Bryce is a college student and it's a holiday weekend, like we see so often in these cases, they actually get an emergency subpoena to ping Bryce's phone from AT&T. To be fair, my guess is that this happened so quickly because the phone was in Karen and David's name. So they were basically able to just give permission.
But yeah, they could sign a power of attorney. And
exactly. Yeah. Because, Bryce was driving their car. Bryce was on their car insurance. He had a credit card that was under their name.
Right.
So I have to imagine that his cell phone was under their account as well.
Yeah.
So I think
that's an easy way to subvert filing a subpoena to find Bryce via the cell phone.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's just like, hey, it's my cell phone. I give you permission. Right. Go ping it.
And there's enough evidence there of odd behavior that it's worth investigating for law enforcement.
Right. And so they were actually able to ping Bryce's phone that night. So when they do, because obviously it took a little bit of time,
sure.
It's about 9 p.m. So now we're looking at about 22-ish hours from the time he left Kim's house. And they find that Bryce hasn't moved.
He's still at the same rest stop?
He's still in
Or the cell phone is?
Yeah. He's still in Buttonwillow. Over the entire day, he had only moved about 8 miles. So the OC sheriffs call Kern County, which is where Buttonwillow is, and they find Bryce parked off the interstate.
Still in his car?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
If Bryce were a child, this would be where this story would end happily. Like, they found him. He was missing, and they filed a missing persons report. But hey, here he is.
Right.
But he's 19. So police get there, and they talk to Bryce. Now, Bryce sounds fine, but they give him a field sobriety test anyway, which he passes. Bryce also gives them permission to search his car, which we do, for the record, say don't ever do that.
Dumb move. Doesn't matter if you have anything in there or not.
No,
Dumb move.
never, ever give permission.
Always say no.
But in any case, Bryce gave permission so the officers search his car, and they're basically looking for drugs.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, the kid's acting weird.
This is completely erratic behavior.
Yeah. And like, he passed the field sobriety test, so they think it's probably not alcohol, but they're still searching for alcohol as well. But now they're thinking like drugs.
Yeah.
So they search his car, but they don't find anything. They don't find anything of interest whatsoever. They tell him about the missing persons report that his parents filed, and are like, hey, so what's going on? Like, you know, you're kind of missing right now. And Bryce basically tells them that he's going to go home, but he just needs a little time to himself to kind of decompress and like get ready to go home.
Okay.
So they encourage him strongly to call his mom because she's obviously frantic.
Yeah.
But Bryce doesn't want to. Like, he keeps on kind of, you know, like saying like, no, I'm okay. The officer probably doesn't want to deal with any of this shit, to be quite frank.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like, can you imagine how annoying this call must be for like the responding officers?
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, Jesus Christ, I just want to go home.
Dude, just call your fucking mom.
Yeah, right?
Like,
so he literally dials Karen's number and hands the phone to Bryce. Is like, talk to your fucking mom. He does. And at this point, Karen is obviously happy that Bryce hasn't crashed his car or anything, you know, but again, he left his girlfriend's house nearly 24 hours ago.
Right.
And she has no idea if he slept or if he's eaten or anything during this period. So Karen tells him to get something to eat and come home. But there's no evidence of a crime. Bryce doesn't appear to be in distress, so there's really nothing the police officers on the scene can do at this point.
No, not at all. There's nothing.
Exactly. So they have to leave because everything appears fine.
I mean, he's not acting as though he's a danger to himself or others, so they can't forcefully commit him. There's nothing they can do.
No, you don't have to go home to your mom. Like, that's not a law.
So, especially not as an adult.
Exactly. Like, when you're 19, like, you don't have to.
Yeah.
So there's literally nothing the officers can do. They did their due diligence.
They did. Absolutely.
And they had to leave. But before all of this, before the officers found Bryce and everything, and Karen was still in panic mode, she had called Christian again. And she didn't reach him, but she left a message. Christian ended up returning her call a little while after the police had gone to see Bryce and everything had kind of gotten cleared up. Once again, Christian, the nicest auto repair employee in the world.
I mean, this guy is like the unsung hero.
I know, he really is. He offered to go check on Bryce.
Wow.
Yeah, and Karen's like, no, like, you don't have to do that. I mean, the police were there. I talked to him. He's going to get something to eat. He's going to come home. But like, Christian's like, I'm just going to do it anyway. This is right down the road for me. I'm just going to do it. Sure enough, Bryce is still there. So this time, Christian was like, all right, let me follow you to the interstate and watch you get on it. So Christian literally follows Bryce. He makes sure he's heading south on I-5 and trails him for the next 10 miles.
This guy deserves an award.
I know. So he trails it for 10 miles. It's like, okay, he's going. He's on I-5. This is what I can do. So at that point, Christian pulls off to the side of the road, calls Karen, and is like, all right, he's coming to you. This time, like, I see his wheels moving. So I'm sure Karen, at that point was breathing a sigh of relief. She wasn't just taking Bryce's word for it this time. She called him several times, and asked him to describe landmarks to her and things like that to make sure he was actually heading their way. But Bryce didn't really want to do that. He kept on saying like, oh, I don't know. I can't see signs. I can't really tell. But my GPS says that I'll be home at 3:25 a.m.
What time of day is this? I'm losing track of the timeline because he spent so much time at the rest stop.
Yeah, no, he did. So this is after midnight, probably like around 1 a.m.-ish on August 30th.
Yeah, okay, all right. Because, I mean, it didn't sound like he was that far away from his parents' house.
No, he was 3 hours away.
Okay.
And so, like, he left at around midnight-ish. His GPS said that he'd be home at 3:25. Karen hears from Bryce again at 2:09 a.m. on August 30th. He tells his mom that he's tired, which, like, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Because even if he had gotten some sleep along the line, it probably wasn't very good sleep.
No, and he's been in a car for almost 36 hours at this point.
Exactly. According to his route, at this point, he should only be about an hour and a half from home, but, he says he can't make it. So he tells Karen that he's just going to pull over and get some sleep, and then he'll make the last leg of the journey home.
Okay.
Now, Bryce's parents obviously don't love this idea. Like, they just want him to get home, but they're also worried about his safety. So they tell him okay, and, they go and try to get some sleep themselves. The next morning, the doorbell rings at 8 a.m. Karen and David jump out of bed expecting it to be Bryce. Instead, it's a local California Highway Patrol officer. He asks the Laspisas if they own a 2003 Toyota Highlander. Their hearts sinking, they tell the officer that they do. And that's when everything changes. The officer tells the Laspisas that their car, the one Bryce was driving, was found on an access road right in front of Castaic Lake. This lake is about 2 hours away from their home. The car had been involved in a crash. It was on its side with the airbag deployed and the back window shattered. It was also at the bottom of a 25-foot embankment. But Bryce was nowhere to be found. And that's where we're ending this week.
Ah, come on.
I told you at the very beginning it was going to be a two-parter.
I know, but I have so many theories that I don't want to get into yet.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I want to know more information about Bryce's family life. I want to know more information about his mom and adopted dad. I want to get into their background.
Well, so...
Because I have some theories going in my head as far as what was going on with him.
Yeah, and I'll be curious because I do have some outside theories about that coming from people who knew Bryce in high school. Mm-hmm. They have some things to say about this relationship.
Come on. I know where we're going with this. I know what happened to him. Well, I don't know what happened to him, but I know...
I don't know, honey.
I know I feel like I understand the trepidation of him coming home.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Because I think at this point when I was researching, I didn't necessarily...
It's a complete gut instinct.
Yeah.
I think he was gay and he was afraid of coming out to his parents. And
what makes you think that?
Staying up all night with a friend, playing video games, in air quotes, probably something that night triggered maybe something that he'd been thinking about before, then the sudden breakup with his girlfriend, maybe he's starting to work his way through it. And is afraid to tell his mom and dad.
That's interesting.
I could be completely wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't know. And I will say, I mean,
it just seems like that behavior over that length of time is not drugs unless he's continuing to take those drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So if he had taken a pill that night when he was playing video games, like that would have been worn off.
Mm-hmm.
Those type of drugs don't stay in your system for very long. I mean, even cocaine and crack is out of your system in 24 to 36 hours.
Okay, well, what I will say is that there are indications that it wasn't a one-time thing.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, to just be sitting on the side of the road for that long.
Yeah.
And to be so hesitant to come home, yet at the same time, he wants to go home.
Right. Because he could have just gone back to his apartment and been done with
and
it.
Just taken all the drugs that he wanted and continued to live his life up there.
Right.
And he said to his parents that he had something important that he wanted to talk to them about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was something life-altering. It's just my theory that maybe he was going to come out to them.
That's really interesting.
Again, could be totally wrong.
Well, yeah. And I mean, so next week is going to be a lot about the theories that are floating around about this case. We're going to get more into his movements between the time he told his parents he was going to pull over and get some sleep and when his car crashed.
Mm-hmm.
We'll also dig deeper into his behavior prior to this road trip and, more information that his roommate gave. And like I mentioned, I did find a Reddit thread that purportedly has people from his high school who knew him and have some insight into his relationship with his parents. And then also just some other interesting insights about Vyvanse, the drug that he was allegedly taking.
Yeah, I'll be curious to hear about that.
Yeah. So that I thought was very interesting. So we're going to talk about that next week. So stay tuned for part 2 of Bryce Laspisa's story. When 19-year-old Bryce Laspisa broke up with his college girlfriend suddenly and told his parents that he had something he needed to talk to them about, they assumed that he was going through typical teenage problems. Bryce had just started his sophomore year at Sierra College in Rocklin, California, and maybe he was having trouble adjusting. But when Bryce left his girlfriend's house on the night of August 28, 2013, Bryce didn't go home to his apartment. Instead, he kept driving. And driving. What followed was over 2 days of aimless wandering that resulted in a car crash and Bryce never being seen again. Nearly 8 years later, his family, friends, and armchair detectives are still trying to figure out what happened to Bryce Laspisa. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell the stories of those who never came home. I want to tell you the story of Bryce Laspisa. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you for joining us once again.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into part 2 of this episode.
Let's get to Bryce's story.
Yeah, let's get into it. This, also, I'm like so exhausted from so many 2-part episodes.
Okay, so here's where I have some bad news that I've been keeping from you.
Come on.
This, I think, is going to be a 3-parter.
No.
Babe, okay, but...
No.
for a very good reason. I was trying to wrap this up, and then something happened. And what happened actually led to new information in this case that I have not seen out there before. So even though, last week I talked about how this case is more well known than most of the ones that we cover.
Well, yeah.
I have new information on this case, and I don't think we're going to fit it all into this episode.
We're going on vacation, babe. I don't understand how we're going to fit this in before it gets out to the rest of the world.
Okay, well, our marital spats are for off mic time. All right?
Okay,
let's go. When we left off last week, Bryce had been driving in the direction of his parents' house for about 2 days. Bryce's parents lived in Laguna Niguel, California, which was about 8 hours south of his apartment in Rockland.
And to be fair, he spent most of a day sitting at a rest stop on the side of the highway. So so he wasn't actually driving the whole time, technically.
No, he was not, but he was in his car the whole time.
Yeah.
In Buttonwillow, California. That's where that rest stop was, where he spent about 13 hours.
Still need to figure out where Buttonwillow, California is.
Yeah, it's just a small little town on I-5 in between his apartment and his parents' house.
I just want to go there so that I could say that I've been to Buttonwillow.
Yeah.
Because who the hell knows where Buttonwillow, California is?
Yeah, no. I mean, people who follow true crime, that's who knows.
Well, apparently,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's about 3.5 hours north of Laguna Niguel. So he spent a lot of his time there, but once he finally got back on the road after Christian, the world's best auto repair shop employee.
No kidding. Again, dude needs an award.
Yeah. Once he followed Bryce onto I-5 South and followed him for 10 miles to make sure he kept on going in the right direction, he did make it another hour and a half down the interstate to Castaic Lake. Now, during this part of his trip, Bryce called his parents at 2:09 a.m. on August 30th, 2013, and he told them that he was too tired to drive the last leg of the journey to their house. And it's unclear if Bryce had actually gotten any sleep over the past few days. I've seen reports that said he had been awake for anywhere from 24 to up to 72 hours at that point.
Yeah, and if you're talking about that length of time, not necessarily 24 hours, because I've been awake for 36 hours, I think is my record.
Mm-hmm.
But going beyond 40 plus hours of no sleep, you begin to hallucinate.
Right.
It becomes a really dangerous situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and we'll get more into the possible drug angle later, but even if this person had never imbibed any sort of substance in his entire life, just being awake for that long.
Yeah, it would result in basically the same side effects.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then if drugs were involved on top of that, then it's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah.
So he tells them that he needs to pull over and get some sleep. So at this point, his parents are like, "Oh my God, you need to get home," but they understand he has to be tired.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Pull over to the side of the road, get some sleep, come home for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they hung up with him and fell into an uneasy sleep themselves.
Well, yeah, because I'm sure that they've been awake for a long time too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They've gotten sleep throughout this, but I'm sure it wasn't good sleep.
Yeah.
And it was only a few hours here and there because, they had a 1 a.m. conversation, a 2 a.m. conversation,
Yeah, and I'm sure the in-between was them talking to each other and trying to figure out a game plan to get him home.
Well, yeah, and when after he got on I-5 South this last time, Karen said in that episode of Disappeared that they were talking constantly, she would call him, he would call them, back and forth.
Yeah. So again, they've been awake for a long time.
Exactly.
As well.
And stressed out of their minds,
stressed,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So when the doorbell rang the next morning around 8, they rushed downstairs thinking their son had finally made it home. Instead, they were greeted by a California Highway Patrol officer. The officer tells the Laspisas that their car, the one Bryce was driving, was found on an access road right in front of Castaic Lake. This lake is about 2 hours away from their home. The car had been involved in a crash. It was on its side with the airbag deployed at the bottom of a 25-foot embankment, but Bryce was nowhere to be found. So now that we're caught up, let's get into the circumstances of this car crash.
Yeah, I want to get into that because you brought up a couple of things that the airbag being deployed, it being on its side, and I think the last episode you said that the rear window was smashed out as well. So I want to kind of diagram that a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll do that to the best of my ability. You know that I'm not great with visualizing things and spatial reasoning.
Sure. Yeah.
But I will do that to the best of my ability based on, what I've seen and what I've read. Bryce's parents, when this CHIP officer appeared on their doorstep, obviously immediately started to panic. I mean, if there's something worse than hearing that your son basically drove off a cliff, it's hearing that your son drove off a cliff and can't be found.
Yeah, also good reference to CHIP, California Highway Patrol, in case anybody doesn't know what that is. Just saying.
All right, so as I mentioned, the car was on its side. Now, what happened is that Bryce drove down this embankment. The car fell onto its front bumper.
Which explains why the airbag was deployed.
Right. And then turned over onto the driver's side.
To the driver's side.
Yes.
Okay.
Bryce obviously couldn't get out of his door.
Sure.
Because his door was on the ground.
Yeah.
Now, the photos of the car show that there's also damage to the passenger side. And I'll show the photos to you now. And these are also on our blog for those of you who are listening. Okay, so this is a photo of the car at the crash, in situ, as they would say. So here it is lying on its side.
Well, that's not at all what I was expecting, honestly.
How's that different?
Well, I wasn't expecting it to be on a road. The way I was picturing it was being so close to a lake. I was expecting the embankment to end at a lake.
Yeah, keep that in mind.
Okay. Did you say you have pictures of the passenger side? Because it does look like there's damage to that door.
Yeah, so this is what people saw when they got to the accident site, right? So what I'm going to show you next are photos of the car after it was towed away.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at these photos, it doesn't appear as though there was another vehicle involved. There's no paint transfer on the car itself.
Right.
There's a lot of vertical scratches on the car, which is interesting. There's also a large dent in the passenger side front fender, which leads me to believe that maybe he hit a guardrail or a Jersey barrier on the side of the road, on the passenger side of the road, which would lead to a lot of the scratches along that side of the car too. And that same dent continues down past the rear passenger side door. So you're looking at. So to me, it looks like a Jersey barrier or a guardrail that height-wise is just about at the door handle level.
Mm-hmm. For reference, this is a 2003 Toyota Highlander, which is an SUV.
Right. Yeah. So it's a pretty. I
would say a medium.
It's a pretty high barrier.
I would say a medium-sized SUV. Would you agree, or would you say it's large?
A Highlander?
Yeah.
That's large.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So it's a pretty high barrier. Yeah. Honestly, without having any other paint transfer from another vehicle, that's the only thing that I could assume is that it's a Jersey barrier or something along the side of the road that he hit.
Right.
It's also missing the side view mirror.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Well, on which side?
The passenger side.
Oh, okay.
But show me the picture of it on its side again, because I feel like that mirror was there.
Oh, so you're right. It was
that
there.
Might have been. Yeah, so that might have just been lost when they flipped it over and
Yeah.
towed it. But regardless, there's obvious damage to the passenger side, and it actually looks like the passenger side door has been opened.
Yeah, and so I don't know when this photo was taken, so I don't know if...
Well, I'm looking at now at the photo of it on its side when they found it.
Well, no, I know that, but I don't know if that photo was taken before investigators, EMTs,
Got
anybody
into the car.
Yeah.
Well, just from this picture, it looks as though the passenger side door has been opened.
Right.
It looks like he hit something on the passenger side and then somehow ended up going down the embankment and landing front first, and then rolled onto the driver's side.
Yeah, so I don't know if the damage that you see on the passenger side prevented Bryce from leaving through that door, or if the door appears open because that is how Bryce exited the car.
Right.
The Highlander's back window was also broken out, which I mentioned before, and police believe that it looked like it was broken from the inside. So they think that that's actually how Bryce left the car.
Okay.
See, I have a hard time with that for a couple of reasons. One, it does look like the passenger door had been open, like you said, right?
Right.
Now, whether or not that is because Bryce opened it and exited that way, or, police, EMTs, whoever opened it, the door, it appears, was able to be opened.
Right. It's ajar in that one photo.
Because my initial question was, when I saw the passenger side damaged, was did it basically, shut the door? Like, did the damage basically dent the door
so that it couldn't
in a
be
way?
opened? Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And so Bryce could not exit the car through the doors and had to exit through the back.
Let me see that picture again.
The one on the side?
Yeah, the initial photo.
Yeah. My concern, and what makes me question whether or not he left from the back, is one, a back window is extremely hard to break.
Yes.
And unless it's already cracked, right? And which it very well could have been, having been in an accident like that, right?
Sure.
So if it was already cracked, it was already broken, it would have been fairly easy, I think, to kind of kick it out. But to my knowledge, there wasn't any blood found on the back window, which I feel like had he exited that way through broken glass, more than likely there would have been some blood.
Well, not necessarily. The windows in cars are safety glass all the way around.
Yeah.
So it doesn't shatter the same as regular glass.
So you don't think he necessarily would have cut himself on that glass, is what you're saying?
Yeah, no, I don't think that he would have at all. When a vehicle flips over like that, it's not crazy to think that the back window would also shatter.
Right.
Even in an instance like this, also along the lines of the safety glass, like that, it's safety glass, so it takes a tremendous amount of effort to break that. And typically when it breaks as one piece almost, which you don't have here. So my thought is...
So what do you think that does look like?
What it looks like to me is that when it landed front bumper side down first, which deployed the airbag, and then when it rolled onto its side, I think that the rear window, given that it is a curved surface, burst.
Okay. From the pressure.
From the pressure, and it's a curved surface, curving outward slightly.
Yeah.
But, enough that when it would land on its side, the glass wouldn't necessarily fall into the cavity of the vehicle because it's curved outward.
Right.
So to me, that what I see is that the rear window shattered on impact when it rolled onto its side from the basically being upright
from
the front,
right,
and then slamming down on its side, and then the window shattered out,
right,
because of the curvature of the window. That would be my take.
Yeah. So you don't think necessarily that Bryce left through the back window at all?
I mean, he might have.
Yeah.
But again, we have that picture where the door is ajar. So the question is, like you brought up, Was it EMTs? Was it first responders on the scene opening that door to get in there? But why would they? First on the scene would shine flashlights in through the windows, presumably. It's not like I'm going to climb onto a car that's on its side to open the door to look inside. I'm going to look through the windows that are there. And if you don't see anybody, like, what would be the purpose of opening that door?
You're right. And I don't know. And what's interesting is that there was some blood found in the car. Small amounts, but it was found around the driver's seat area, but also on the passenger seat.
So again, it seems to me as though he popped open the passenger side door and climbed out that way.
Yeah.
Think of an SUV. So you've got the second row and then the trunk space, or possibly a third row. I don't know what level of Highlander this was, but there's space behind the back seat. Why would you crawl that distance to climb out when, if you are on your side, if you can just manage to stand up, basically, you can pop open that door like a tank hatch and climb out that way.
Yeah, and he was 5'11", which to me, at first I was like, well, maybe he didn't have enough, he couldn't stand up enough to get leverage.
He definitely had enough.
But yeah, given that it was a Highlander, there's a lot of room between the driver's door and the passenger door. I think he would have been able to stand up enough to get leverage.
Yeah, absolutely.
And open that door.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and like I said, they did find blood on the passenger side. What they did not find was blood outside of the car at all. So, they would...
How much blood are we talking?
Small amounts, like small enough that investigators did not think that he had been mortally or gravely injured.
Right.
At least externally, because you never know about internal bleeding, things like that, right?
Yeah.
But like in terms of the amount of blood, it was not an amount of blood that in and of itself gave them concern for his well-being, And it was such a small amount of blood that there was zero trail leading away from the car.
So maybe whatever scrapes he had on him, cuts, whatever.
Right.
The blood transferred because he was using parts of the vehicle to get out.
Yeah, like if his hand was bleeding and he grabbed the headrest on the passenger side to give himself a boost, leverage to pull himself up, right, then blood got on the headrest.
Yeah.
Again, small amounts of blood, but nothing that would indicate to investigators that he was terribly injured. So what was probably even more alarming than the blood found in the car was what else police found inside the car. They found Bryce's laptop and his cell phone. His duffel bag and wallet were outside of the car on the ground. So at this point, due to the lack of blood and, the lack of Bryce, his parents are starting to think that he crashed his car, became disoriented, and was wandering around somewhere.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah. But as the investigation gets underway, detectives started to map out Bryce's last movements before the crash. So, they did what you should do in missing persons cases. Like, you try to find any sort of outside information that you can. And in this case, it was cell phone data, which they had already used before when Bryce was considered a missing person briefly.
Right.
The other day. And they started pulling surveillance video.
Good.
Yeah. So eventually, what they found via his cell phone records and surveillance video is that sometime before dawn that morning, like before 5 a.m., Bryce drove up Lake Hughes Road up to the service area for a cell tower. This service area was at the top of a steep embankment overlooking Castaic Lake. After studying the tire tracks left in the dirt, because this is where he started his descent down this embankment, this access road by the cell tower, police determined that not only did Bryce not use his brakes on the way down this 20-foot embankment, but he likely had his foot on the gas. So the detective in the episode of Disappeared kind of went through this, and he said that Bryce was going so fast down this embankment that he, made very deep tire tracks and was kicking up large rocks on his way down that were hitting the undercarriage of his car. So I think some of the damage that you notice, including those vertical scrapes, could possibly be the brush that he was driving through.
Yeah.
And the rocks.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So did they think this was a possible suicide attempt?
Well, yeah. So once police find this, that's exactly where their minds went. They put it together with his strange behavior.
I mean, that's where all the evidence is pointing at that point. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And, what's more, they think that he may have actually been trying to drive into the lake. Now, and that's why I told you to keep that in mind, what you were picturing in your head, which is that this embankment was right over the lake.
But there was a road underneath.
There was
in between.
But when you're at the top of that embankment,
I'm sure you can't see
the road.
Yeah, yeah.
You just see the lake. So it appears from standing on top of the embankment that if you drive off, you would just drive into the lake. But in reality, as we find, there is this road at the bottom, and the lake itself is on the other side of the road. So police speculate that Bryce tried to drive into the lake, but when that didn't work, he escaped the car and entered the water by foot. Further bolstering this theory that Bryce did this on purpose was the fact that surveillance video showed that Bryce actually drove around, and he drove to the top of this embankment 3 separate times.
I was curious about how he found this embankment.
Yeah.
So it seems like an access road to
yeah.
a cell tower is not, I mean, sure, you can pick it out when you're driving along the side of the highway, but it's not something that you'd be familiar with. So,
oh, no, certainly not.
It leading to a steep drop off into presumably, visually, into a lake.
Yeah.
That's not something that he would have known unless he went up there and found it.
Right.
So,
yeah. So he drove there 3 separate times to the top of this embankment. The first time was at 2:15 a.m., right after he got off the phone with his mom and told her that he was pulling over to get some sleep. And it's not just his behavior during this multi-day drive that's making police think that Bryce had tried to take his own life. Shortly before Bryce's disappearance, he made a move that is a hallmark of people who have decided to take their own lives. He started giving away his possessions. Before he left his apartment for what would turn out to be the last time, Bryce gave his roommate Sean his Xbox. Not only that, but Bryce had pierced ears, and so his mother had given him at some point a pair of her diamond earrings, and he gave those to his roommate as well.
Like legit real diamond earrings?
From what I understand, yes.
Wow.
Plus, there was the drinking. Now, remember when last week I said that Bryce's friends had said that he had been drinking a lot? So it was really a lot. According to them, he was drinking hard liquor and would go through 2 bottles by himself in a weekend.
Holy shit, that's a lot.
Yeah, and I haven't read anything that specifically said what size of bottles, but unless we're talking about airplane bottles, that's worrisome.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, especially for somebody so young. I mean, he was only 19.
Yeah.
And if he didn't have a history of heavy drinking, which according to most accounts, he didn't.
Yeah, it seems like this came out of the blue.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, you don't have that level of tolerance. That's a lot of alcohol.
Oh, dude. I mean, you should have seen me in college. I mean, 2 weak rum and cokes.
Yeah, sure.
And I was done.
I mean, you're like a featherweight now, so.
I am not. I feel like my tolerance is way too high now.
Nah.
But in any case, when I was 19 or 21, like it was something completely different. Plus, Bryce's girlfriend, Kim, told police that the night this all started, the night that he came over to her apartment, not only had he been drinking that night, but he was taking Vyvanse, that ADHD medication that we had talked about. Now, what I find interesting is that if this is true, what Kim says, that he was under the influence of both Vyvanse and alcohol, Bryce's mom apparently couldn't tell that he had been drinking when she was on the phone with him. She wouldn't have told Kim, presumably, to give him back his keys if he sounded drunk.
Is Vyvanse an upper?
Yeah.
And alcohol's downer?
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe there's some equilibrium as far as...
the way you sound or the way you present yourself?
Maybe.
Yeah, I honestly do not know.
But that's also a hallmark of somebody that's more experienced in alcohol and drug use. Not
that they can hide it that well.
Yes, not like a 19-year-old kid.
Yeah, so keep that in mind too. Regardless, we do also need to keep in mind that when police searched his car... Remember, after he was reported missing by his mother and police found him and he gave them permission to search his car, police did not turn up any drugs or alcohol, and he passed a field sobriety test. Now, what I do not know is whether or not that duffel bag, the one that was found on the ground outside, whether or not he gave consent for the police to search that duffel bag.
Right.
So I do not know if that duffel bag was searched. I do not know if he had anything in there. I would believe from a common sense perspective that if he did have drugs or alcohol in that duffel bag, that he wouldn't have given police consent to search any part of his car. But I don't know.
No, I agree with you. And I also think that if he had agreed to the search of his vehicle and then denied the search of a bag, that also would have been noted in the police record.
Yeah,
like and that's a red flag for cops. Like,
sure.
If nothing criminal about it, nothing you can do as a cop. Like you can't
force him to let you search the bag,
absolutely
right? Because they don't have probable
there's
cause.
There's no probable cause. There's no reason for them to legitimately go into that bag. But if it was denied, if access was given to the car so willingly and then the bag was denied, that definitely would have been noted in a police report.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I completely agree. And I feel like, with all of the coverage that this case has gotten, especially, with the disappeared episode that did have interviews with the detective, like that would have been noted, right?
Oh, for sure.
They would have been like, oh yeah, he agreed to the search, but didn't agree to the search of this duffel bag.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah, right?
Like
exactly.
Yeah. So in my mind, they searched everything.
Right. And I think that's a reasonable assumption to make. We don't know. It is still an assumption, obviously.
Absolutely, it's an assumption.
But I do think that is reasonable. But I do want to take a little sidebar to talk about Vyvanse. I don't know what this is. Well, exactly. I had never heard of this drug before researching this story, but the good people over on the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit were able to give some insight. Reddit user MKHewitt26 talked about their personal experience with Vyvanse. Quote, occasionally when I was in college in Minnesota, I would take an extra Vyvanse at night during finals week to help me stay up and study, something I definitely wasn't supposed to be doing, by the way. When I do that, I would get what I like to call episodes, where I would lose my sight and start shaking and be unable to see. These would only happen after I hadn't slept while taking too much of the Vyvanse during finals week. To this day, doctors don't really know what to call these episodes, though I've undergone lots of testing and it's a huge concern. My point in telling you this is that if Bryce had been taking Vyvanse, was not used to taking it regularly, or simply was taking it in addition to not sleeping for days at a time, I believe it's entirely possible that he suffered a stroke or some sort of episode. I fully remember my strange behavior after I would have these episodes, and often they would take such a toll on me mentally that I would be unable to recall information for periods of time, end quote. And then they concluded by saying, quote, if he had been taking it and then he suddenly stopped, the crash is terrible. I have attempted to stop taking Vyvanse on my own, and it's not only physically painful, it also will alter your mental state drastically. Hallucinations during withdrawal are not uncommon, as well as increased anxiety and paranoia, end quote. I'm going to preface, this is just like some random person on Reddit, like not a doctor, whatever.
Sure. But it's somebody that's describing their experience.
Right.
If it's true. The come down almost sounds like almost heroin-esque. Like to have that level of physical pain as well as mental. That's pretty serious.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, it sounds like this is
I don't know
joke.
anything about this drug. So
yeah.
This is all fascinating to me.
Yeah, so I don't know. But what was interesting is that the comment section of this Reddit thread had several people weighing in on the whole drug angle in general, with several self-proclaimed former addicts chiming in to say that they actually believe that Bryce spent all of that time in Buttonwillow waiting for a dealer.
That's a long time.
It is. So, the cat who Shatner said, quote, I myself have been in that same situation before, stuck in a parking lot for hours, waiting until your lazy-ass oxy dealer gets off his butt to meet you, and you definitely don't want to leave until you get your drugs, so until then, you're stuck, end quote.
Okay, but Buttonwillow is a long way from his campus, where he was, or his apartment, where he was supposedly using.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I know Buttonwillow is kind of in between his apartment and
it is, but it's
his parents.
It's still 5 hours away from where he lives.
Yeah, that's a long way to go for a dealer.
No, it is. And that's what a lot of other people in the comment thread said. But again, former addicts, Road Dog 29 agreed, adding, as a former heroin addict, that's exactly what crossed my mind. So panicked over missing the dope man, you're white-knuckling the steering wheel and afraid to blink so you don't miss him, end quote. And then again, but the problem is, like, Buttonwillow, is so far away. And
from either location.
Exactly. So why is he waiting there for a dealer?
Yes.
And to me, this is definitely the biggest problem with this theory. However, it could have been that he got connected with someone in Buttonwillow from someone that he went to college with. And, so maybe he went to college with somebody who had drug connections
connection in Buttonwillow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the only way that could kind of make sense to me.
It just seems like there would be a dealer, not necessarily of Vyvanse, but some other drug that could take the place of Vyvanse.
Closer?
Yeah. I mean, he's living in a college town, right?
Right, exactly. So, yeah, one would think that you could get drugs. Yeah, but beyond the logical issues with this, even if Bryce was, in fact, sitting at a rest stop in Buttonwillow for 13 hours waiting for a drug dealer, that still doesn't answer the main question. What happened to him after he crashed his car?
Right.
Obviously, Bryce taking his own life is a theory that investigators went with, but Bryce's parents have always contended that that's not something Bryce would have done. They believe that Bryce sustained a head injury in the accident and walked away not knowing who he was.
That very well could be as well.
Yeah, and, as a parent, I can't imagine how difficult it would be to, one, find out that your son is missing, and then to, two, have police tell you that they think that he harmed himself. It must be a terribly difficult idea to entertain, But, there is actually some physical evidence that indicates that their belief may be more than just wishful thinking. On the 9th day of the investigation, searchers brought in bloodhounds. These dogs started at Bryce's car and went all the way to Government's Cove, where investigators believed he could have entered the water. Divers started in the shallow areas but continued to go deeper. Their searches, however, were fruitless. But the dogs did pick up Bryce's scent, and it led directly to a nearby truck stop where it then vanished. So this, of course, led people to speculate that maybe Bryce didn't take his own life. Maybe he got a ride and started a new one.
Could be. You said that he left his wallet?
Yes, his wallet, his cell phone, his laptop.
Was there money in the wallet?
I think so. I don't think
this seems to be a recurring thing, where people leave to, in theory, start a new life and they leave money.
Right.
But who knows how much he actually had? It's not like they left a wad of $400 or $1,000 or whatever.
Yeah, and I think if it had been a substantial amount of cash, like that also would have been mentioned.
Yeah.
So, if he's like any other college student, if he had any cash, like...
Yeah, sure.
It was probably like $5 or something.
Yeah.
But to go back to Reddit, another commenter who calls themselves the Anonymous Hooligan claims to be, quote, a bit of an insider. And, we obviously, again, have to take this generally with a whole pound of salt. But this person does have some interesting things to say, including, quote, I can say with certainty that there were issues between Bryce and his family. While Bryce's mother, Karen, is an unrepentant psycho, I am told that Bryce had a tight, borderline codependent relationship with her in the years leading up to his disappearance, but not much is known about the relationship in the final year or so. His relationship with his father, Mike, was at times very tumultuous, as Mike would lose his temper, yell, and scream at Bryce over things as trivial as not understanding how to complete his math homework. I don't know if the relationship was ever physically violent, but there was most definitely a lot of verbal/emotional abuse going on in that household, and not just with Bryce, end quote.
So again, we don't know who this person is, and we can't verify anything that they're saying. It does somewhat fit with part of my theory was that there's something going on at home that he's stressed out about and doesn't want to talk about.
Right.
And I asked about the parents' background.
Whether or not they're religious or...
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I had a certain angle because that was my presumption, and it could be completely off. But, you have a strict household, a codependent relationship. That's a huge thing that would also explain why there were so many phone calls back and forth.
Like when he had a fight with his girlfriend and called his mom.
Yeah.
During it.
Sure. Yeah. Now again, I'm not putting any credit on this Redditor.
Yes, Redditor. Yeah.
Because again, it all adds up. It all aligns, but this is hindsight from somebody that we don't know what their interaction with the family is, what knowledge they have. They claim to have inside knowledge. Well, you're just somebody on the internet, so we can't verify any of that. It does make sense given the picture, but who knows?
Well, that was my thought too. I was reading all of these posts because this person did make several on this thread, giving what appeared to be kind of inside information or insight into the Laspisa family. And, I was a little torn about, like, is this just some random person on the internet just trying to get attention? Like, does this person actually know the family? Like, what's going on? Because the person, didn't seem to actually know Bryce himself, so I was like, I don't know. So I actually decided to dig a little bit deeper into it. And that is the reason that we actually do have to have a part 3 on this case, because I found out some things, and we talked a lot in this episode about, theories about the car crash. And we talked about all of the evidence that led the police to believe that Bryce had taken his own life. And in my opinion, it is compelling evidence.
For sure, yeah.
Right? What's interesting, and I think why this case has endured and why this case gets covered so often, is because while that evidence is compelling, I do feel that the evidence that Bryce is possibly still alive is also compelling. And I was able to find out more information that has not been covered in the other podcasts that have been done on his case, that has not, to my knowledge, actually been covered anywhere. And we need to talk about it. And this episode is already long, so we actually have to get into this in part 3 and talk about it a little more and talk about evidence that may perhaps indicate that the narrative of this case that has been presented in the media since 2013 isn't necessarily the objective truth. When Bryce Laspisa drove off a 25-foot embankment in front of Castaic Lake in California, investigators believe that he had decided to take his own life. After all, his friends had reported that he had been behaving erratically, drinking heavily, and taking drugs. He had given his roommate his Xbox and a pair of diamond earrings that had been gifted to him by his mother. He had broken up with his girlfriend out of the blue. But only a small amount of Bryce's blood was found inside of his wrecked vehicle, and bloodhounds later tracked his scent to a nearby truck stop. This made some people wonder, did Bryce take his own life, or simply decide to start a new one? When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell the stories of those who never came home. I want to tell you the story of Bryce Laspisa. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. Our first 3-parter.
Thank you for joining us once again. Ethan is very surly with me right now.
I'm very annoyed. Yes, I understand there's a lot of information with this case, but
it's late and he has to work in the morning. And I've already made him redo a hall bathroom.
Yeah.
Let's
get back
talk
into
about Bryce and finish this story. I mean, for now, because obviously with all of our cases,
still ongoing. Yeah.
Yeah, because we don't cover solved cases. So this is absolutely still ongoing. I hope that even though the information I'm about to give in this episode has not been reported on, I do hope that, we will eventually do a part 4. With every case that we have, I hope that we'll eventually be able to do another episode because we want more information. We want conclusions. We want the families to find peace, the friends, the people who missed,
That's the whole point of this podcast.
Exactly.
Is to bring attention to cases and have the internet sleuths go in, have the armchair detectives go in and investigate, because if we're talking about these cases, then more than likely the actual detectives have reached a dead end, and there's a whole lot of bureaucratic red tape that they can't cross to get help,
Right.
but we can.
So this week, we're going to examine the evidence that points to Bryce still being out there somewhere. I left you last week with a Reddit user who calls themselves Anonymous Hooligan and claims to be an insider, basically. They said on the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit, quote, "I can say with certainty that there were issues between Bryce and his family. While Bryce's mother, Karen, is an unrepentant psycho, I am told that Bryce had a tight, borderline codependent relationship with her in the years leading up to his disappearance, but not much is known about their relationship in the final year or so. His relationship with his father, Mike, was at times very tumultuous, as Mike would lose his temper, yell, and scream at Bryce over things as trivial as not understanding how to complete his math homework. I don't know if the relationship was ever physically violent, but there was most definitely a lot of verbal/emotional abuse going on in that household, and not just with Bryce." End quote.
Yeah, and I said last episode, we have to take that with a grain of salt. We don't know who this user is, but at the same time, I don't want that user to necessarily think that I'm discrediting them, because I don't know who they are. I don't know what insider information they have.
Right.
It does certainly fit. It actually, their information fits more with my theory going into the case that something was going on at home, and that's why there was so much anxiety and trepidation and hesitation on him going home.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with the angle that he was sitting at a rest stop waiting for drugs.
Yeah. Which is something that we talked about a lot last week,
Right.
which is a very popular theory among several of the Reddit users, that I came across.
I think that he was going through a tremendous amount of anxiety about going home, and for whatever reason, he had something that he wanted to tell his parents that was not going to fit with their lives. Whatever it was. Maybe he was quitting school. My first thought was he was gay and wanted to come out.
Mm-hmm.
There's no evidence of any of that. I have no idea. I'm posturing theories, but it seems to me that there was something keeping him from going home.
Yeah, for sure.
And then clearly, there's some other issues, because I do agree with there was a possible attempt with him taking his life.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't walk into the lake. I think that he went off on his own.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, briefly, and this isn't, again, we're not really covering the suicide angle in this episode, but walking into a lake and drowning yourself is an exceptionally difficult thing to do physiologically.
Yes, your body will not let you actually drown yourself.
Yeah.
It's possible, but unassisted, without having rocks or cinder blocks or whatever keeping you down, it's really difficult to do that.
Yeah. Your body just naturally fights against that so much that it's just incredibly physiologically difficult to do.
Yeah.
That is one of the hardest ways you can choose to try to end your own life. And so that in and of itself really makes me doubt that theory. And I'll get to more reasons during the course of this about why I also kind of doubt that theory. But yeah, so getting back to this Reddit user that I mentioned, Anonymous Hooligan, they made several posts in this thread. Another excerpt from one of his posts answers a question that I had at the very beginning of part 1 of this series, the very first question I had, which is, why would somebody go to community college 8 hours away from home?
Right. It's not saving you any money.
Right.
Exactly. Well, I guess it is.
It is compared to a full-blown college,
sure.
but
you're still driving that distance.
Yeah.
You have to pay for an apartment. The apartment was probably cheaper than living in an apartment in Laguna Beach.
Maybe, yeah, probably. But I mean,
But
still,
like it's
it was
not
a very,
it's not convenient.
No,
by
it was a
any
very
means.
weird kind of confusing move. And so this person said, quote, Karen and Mike shopped around for what school he would attend, gave him no decision in the matter, and shipped him out when the school year began, end quote. They contend that Bryce's parents exerted control via the things that they bought him, the car, the cell phone, his laptop, etc., and that they had access to all of it. Now, to a degree, we've actually seen that this is the case. His parents had access to his phone, at least to a degree, because, again, he was on their plan. So they were able to get permission to ping his phone very quickly when they filed that missing persons report. They had access to his credit card because they saw what charges he made. And they paid for his car insurance. So when he used that insurance to call roadside assistance, they were immediately notified.
Okay, so while I agree with you,
Yeah.
I am also going to play devil's advocate here. He's a 19-year-old kid. While that could fit the narrative of a controlling parent, it could also fit the narrative of a helpful parent.
Yes.
Providing their child with all of these things.
That is 100% correct.
And
because I didn't have any of that in college. That's fine. Had to do it all myself.
Neither
Whatever.
did I. But
I had plenty of friends who were in this exact same situation.
Yeah.
But those friends, and I can think of one in particular who was my roommate, her parents would actually threaten her
they
with like,
used
if
it.
you,
they
yeah,
used
they
it.
absolutely
Yes.
did. They were like,
Yeah.
we pay for your car and we can take it away, things like that.
Yeah.
So yes, even if their intentions were good, like I could absolutely see them still using it as a method of control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't mean to bring that up because I tend to agree with the other side that it was a controlling factor.
Yeah.
However, I just wanted to present the opposite side where it's not 100% like dastardly villain.
No.
Parents. It's parents that wanted to help out their child, but also had access to all of these things.
Yeah, I don't think it's black and white at all.
Yeah.
Anonymous Hooligan thinks that Bryce was sick of this control, though. And they believe that was the big thing that Bryce wanted to tell his parents, that he was done. But they contend that he chickened out and just kind of left instead of telling them face to face. They said, quote, "To me, his actions were a great big fuck you to his manipulative, controlling, abusive parents. What better way to let them know you're done than by intentionally wrecking their car and leaving behind all the accoutrements they paid for with their money and leveraged as a means of control," end quote.
Again, I mean, I can 100% see that. If that's the narrative we're going with, that it fits, it makes sense.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because we've had so many cases where the police are like, maybe they just walked away and started a new life. And it is literally my least favorite thing to hear. But this is one of those cases where I'm like, whoa, shit, maybe.
Yeah.
Daniel Ewan, the one who ran away from the CEDU school, he's another one who I absolutely do believe.
I believe he's out there alive right now.
Yeah.
Has his own family, and he left a bad situation and made his own life.
Decided to stay gone. Yeah.
No, I agree.
And so this is another one where I was like, maybe, because typically when they leave behind their cell phone and their wallet, I'm like, oh my God, give me a break. Nobody does that. But the point that they make, that he was leaving behind all of the things that his parents gave him and paid for, I don't know. I can kind of see it.
Yeah, I can totally see it too. I mean, I don't want to get too into my own life, because that's
That's what the other show is.
Unplugged from the Darkness. But there was definitely a time when I wanted to escape a situation. I was fortunate enough that I had an out.
Right.
That others don't.
Yeah.
So, I can definitely see doing something like that.
Yeah.
And
especially if, again, he had been abusing this medication, Vyvanse,
oh, sure,
right?
yeah.
He had been drinking. He hadn't been sleeping. Like, you know what I mean? Like, all of that.
It all builds up, and
yeah,
you get into a catastrophic state of mind
yes.
where it's this or nothing, and then an attempt on his life that fails.
Right.
Then you're left with, I went to the extreme of trying to commit suicide, and it didn't work. Now what?
Right.
That completely alters your frame of mind. On top of everything, it's compounding.
Yeah.
So it is very realistic, to have something like this happen where you're freaking out, and you press the gas, you mash the gas, and you go down this embankment, and you're like, I'm doing it, whatever, and it doesn't work, and you wake up, you get out of the car, and you're like, well, fuck. But you still can't go back to the life that you were trying to leave. So maybe you just walk up the road to a truck stop and you disappear. It's totally plausible. I'm not saying that's what happened.
Right.
I don't know, but it's completely plausible.
Many other people believe that Bryce's scent ending at that truck stop indicates that he wasn't spending all that time in Buttonwillow waiting for a drug dealer. Some people think not that what you said, that him walking away was kind of a split-second decision after his attempt to take his own life failed. Some people think that he had planned this from the beginning and that he had actually been waiting for a ride.
Okay, but how far away is this truck stop where his scent ended versus Buttonwillow?
No, so Castaic Lake, which is where he ended up,
yeah,
is an hour and a half or 2 hours from Buttonwillow.
Okay. But there's no cell phone usage that we know of after the crash, before the crash.
No, but one of the theories is that because Bryce's parents, his cell phone was on their plan or whatever, one theory is that Bryce had a burner phone and that any communication he was doing outside of the conversations that he was having with his parents were done from that phone.
Okay, so the theory is that he staged the car accident?
Yeah, maybe. That he intentionally wrecked the car.
I have a hard time with that, given the fact that there's evidence that he was actually in the car when the car crashed.
Right, yeah. Because that's a very dicey proposition.
Yeah, like you make this plan to have somebody like come and pick you up at this truck stop,
yeah.
And you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna crash my car.
There are less like potentially fatal ways to do that.
I mean,
right.
How about just not being in the car?
Yeah, and just rolling it down the hill.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like letting the car go.
Yeah, and one of the things that the detective specifically said in that disappeared episode was that the speed that I mentioned in the last episode really did indicate that he was pressing down on the gas and not that the car was in neutral.
Right, and there's no evidence that there was like a knife in that
he could have like cut himself to like give the blood or whatever. You mean?
No. I mean like there was no evidence of anything like pressing down on the gas other than his foot.
Oh yeah, no.
There wasn't like
a brick like in Ferris Bueller.
Sure. Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah, no, nothing.
There wasn't
like
a knife stuck in the floorboard pinning the gas pedal.
No, absolutely not.
So
there was nothing that indicated that Bryce wasn't in that car when it went over the embankment.
Right. So again, that's an extreme that I don't necessarily believe.
Yeah.
Could be, but I don't.
Well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that going on. But Yeah, I mean, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I feel like if you wanted to just wreck the car,
Just roll the fucking car down the hill.
yeah,
And then
or
leave.
just like crash it into something like on flat land, not down.
Yeah, that level of going out of the way,
Yeah.
damaging the car, all of that's too elaborate to just like stick it to your parents.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree. But along the whole lines of this like being planned, or him like planning from the beginning, to kind of walk away, is that some sources I've read have even claimed that the duffel bag that was found was actually found unzipped. So that led to speculation that Bryce didn't leave the crash site empty-handed. Like it appeared that he did, right? Because it appeared that he left with nothing.
Okay, but where is that source coming from that the duffel bag
It's
was
just
unzipped?
other random, like I have read so many articles on this, and like I've read a few that said that it was unzipped. So I don't know if it was or not, because I read one that said it was empty, and I don't actually think that that's the case at all. But yeah, so there is a possibility that he had something in that duffel bag that he wanted to take with him. But going back to your earlier point about when he gave police consent to search his car, you believe that from a practical standpoint, they also would have had consent to search his duffel bag. And if they didn't, it would have been notated, which it wasn't. That if he had had anything of interest, that would have been known by now, right? So like if he had a fake ID, if he had cash, if he had anything.
Let me tell you from my personal experience and legitimately searching a lot of bags. Like you go through everything. You empty out the bag. If you get consent to search a bag, you don't just kind of like stick your hand through and search for hard objects.
Right, not like you're searching the bag to get into a baseball game.
No.
Right? I mean, because they just like kind of stick their hand in.
No, that's not what happens when you get consent to search a bag. When you get consent to search a bag, you empty the contents of that bag.
Right.
And you inventory it. I mean, obviously you're not inventorying it on a report at this point because you got consent to search, but let me tell you, you don't leave a corner in that bag unturned.
Right. And I feel like, this case was 8 years ago. There was a whole episode of Disappeared on it. I think if there had been anything interesting in that bag, at some point the officer would have been like, oh, by the way.
Reported. Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's no way that there was anything nefarious in the bag.
Right. So like maybe he took something, but like it couldn't have been anything.
Maybe he grabbed a hoodie. I don't know. Who knows?
Right? Yeah. I mean,
or maybe it was unzipped because it was just fucking unzipped.
Yeah.
Maybe it hadn't been completely zipped back up from the cops searching it.
Exactly.
Who knows?
So again, it's tough when we're dealing with anonymous people on the internet. But what I will say is that other people came forward who claimed to have known Bryce in high school at Naperville Central High School. And they also kind of say that the image that Karen and Mike have been projecting in the media, like, isn't exactly true. Karen has consistently described her son as having no issues, like maybe dabbling with drugs and alcohol a little bit, but in a normal college way. But like he was great. He was well liked. He had no problems. They were close. Everything was just perfect, right? And that is very much the impression that she is consistently given in any interview or anything since Bryce disappeared. But former classmates have said that he not only smoked weed in high school, he was also known to bring alcohol to school. But pot also wasn't the only drug that Bryce was dabbling in back then. Back in Naperville, when Bryce was in high school, he was arrested for possessing MDMA.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And to me, like, that's big, like that's not something that you just come across. Like, I don't know. I mean, I like, again, I'm not a drug person. I've never been a drug person. So like the idea of like where do you find MDMA this time of night? But like, I don't know. That just seems like a lot to me.
Well,
and I fully
it's-
admit I'm very naive.
Yeah, you are. But that's also something very specific. People smoke pot.
Yeah, I feel like
Whatever.
that would be easy. And so if he had been arrested
Dude, look,
for...
it was easier. It was easier for me to get pot in high school than it was to get alcohol.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So, like, but other drugs, MDMA, like, I couldn't even tell you.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean,
and,
I associated with everybody in high school.
And you grew up and you were in high school in a city. Like I was
Yeah.
in a suburban high school.
Yeah, no, and I was in a city high school. Not a bad
Yeah.
high school by any means, but like it was a lot easier to get drugs than it was alcohol.
Right.
But MDMA is very specific.
Yeah, I thought so too. Because like if he had been arrested for possessing weed, I'd been like, okay, well,
Yeah.
shit
So what?
happens, whatever. But yeah, arrested for MDMA, which to me, like, obviously, I'm not saying that makes him a bad person by any means.
No,
like,
no.
He was a high
no.
school kid. But what I am saying is that is absolutely not in line with the narrative
Right.
that we have been given since 2013.
Right. That there were clearly issues.
Exactly. This didn't come out of nowhere because every single interview, especially that disappeared episode, presents it as if this all started 2 weeks prior to his disappearance.
You said he got arrested for MDMA?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not something that like the parents were blind to.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was clearly more going on than the Laspisas were letting on. I read about this MDMA bust, and so I was kind of Googling around about it to see if I could find more information. And I was doing that tonight, right before we started recording. Because again, like I said at the beginning of the last episode, we've gotten very behind in the schedule.
So like everything that we do in life, we're just guerrilla styling
Yes.
this right now.
Yes, that's our life. And so I was about to leave Reddit and Anonymous Hooligan behind and, move on. Because like those comments that I read about, Karen and Bryce and their relationship, et cetera, those were from like 2 years ago.
Really? Her name's Karen?
I know.
I mean, come on.
I know. But when I was Googling about this MDMA bust, one of the top results was a different thread on Reddit where Anonymous Hooligan posted again, but this one was from less than a week ago. In this post, they say that they're now able to reveal more information, like they've gotten permission to reveal more information. So my impression when I read this was that this person knew the family but didn't necessarily know Bryce, because everything they said about Bryce was like very much seems secondhand.
Kind of general information.
Yeah. This post that I read said that this MDMA arrest was incredibly embarrassing to Mike and Karen, that they had worked very hard to project this image of having a perfect family. And so when their teenage son got arrested for this drug, they did not react well. And again, I don't think I would react well. Like, I would not react well.
No, you wouldn't. But I don't think it's something that we would hide from people either.
We wouldn't. Yeah, you're right. I don't
necessarily
know that we
broadcast it, but
exactly.
we wouldn't go out of our way to hide it. Like
right. We wouldn't like post about it on Facebook.
Well, clearly no, because that is embarrassing. But like at the
Yeah.
same time, we wouldn't. I mean, look, shit happens.
Yeah.
Kids do shit, especially when they're teenagers.
Right.
I mean, I did a lot of shit. I just didn't get caught.
Right.
So I think there's just a different temperament and personality and parenting
Yeah.
between the way we would handle things versus, and I'm not saying ours is better.
This person also alleges that Mike and Karen gave Bryce an ultimatum that he needed to stay off drugs or they would cut off his financial support. And part of the reason that they chose Sierra College for him is that it was a community college, so cheap, but it also offered dorms, which most community colleges do not.
Wait, I thought he was staying in an apartment, though.
He was. Allegedly, according to this person, that's not where Bryce started. Bryce started his freshman year in the dorms at Sierra College, but he was kicked out of the dorms his freshman year for partying-related offenses. And that is what led to him living in this off-campus apartment. So if this is true, it has absolutely been left out of the entire narrative that his parents have been presenting for almost 8 years. And another thing that has allegedly been left out, it's a big one. In the disappeared episode and in every single article I've read about Bryce's case, he's always referred to as the only child of Karen and Mike Laspisa. In fact, that is how I introduced part 1. That was the very beginning of the episode. I said that he was the only child and that Mike adopted him when he was 2 and we don't know anything about his biological father. Yeah, that's not the case. Anonymous Hooligan said, I'm going to tell you right off the bat that this is the information that has not been covered anywhere else. This person posted this on Reddit a few days ago, but to my knowledge, that is the only public source of this information. So this person, Anonymous Hooligan, said, quote, Bryce Laspisa was not an only child. I repeat, Bryce Laspisa was not an only child. It has not been mentioned yet that Mike Laspisa has a child from a previous marriage who is 5 years Bryce's elder, but there you have it. Bryce's stepsister lived with her mother until her untimely demise at the age of 13. So Bryce's sister's mom died when Bryce's sister was 13. It's worded a little confusingly. And that is when the sister began to live permanently with Mike and Karen. To put it bluntly, Karen horribly abused her, and the resulting mental health challenges, PTSD among others, that arose from the abuse prompted Karen and Mike to kick her out of the home, cut her off financially, and ultimately abandon her at a time in her life when she needed it most. End quote. Yeah.
What the fuck? Really?
There's a whole ass other sister that they have never mentioned publicly.
Holy shit.
A sister that they decided had gone off the rails in some regard and allegedly completely cut off and disowned.
Can we verify this at all?
Okay. So I read that. I was like, well, that's some shit.
Yeah. Yeah. But this is also, again, coming from an anonymous source on
and people
Reddit.
are crazy.
So
and again, I included this.
Yeah.
Not to slander the parents of a missing person, because I always, again, try to be very sensitive to the family members.
Sure.
Because they're going through the worst possible thing. But I wanted to bring it up to show that maybe, just maybe, the idea that Bryce walked away from his life isn't as crazy as it may seem on the surface. And this poster's continuous interest in this case, because again, those first posts were from 2 years ago. This one was from 5 days ago.
Right.
And their seemingly insider knowledge, did pique my interest. I was like, is this person full of shit, or what is actually happening here? Because on this last post, this last couple posts on this thread from a few days ago, people did start to push back. They're like, listen, I don't know who you are, but you seem mad, and you're just saying shit that has nothing to do with the official narrative. I don't know who you are. You seem like you're just saying things, right? So,
which is my take.
Right, right.
But at the same time, I don't want to discredit this person because we don't know.
Yeah. So this evening, right before we started recording this, actually, like as we were putting our youngest child to bed, I reached out to Anonymous Hooligan and they wrote back.
Okay, what? What did they say?
Yeah, so we chatted for a little while and they revealed their connection to the family with me.
And they're okay with us
Yes.
putting this on there. Okay.
Yes. And they gave me other identifying information. This person told me that ultimately they're okay with Karen and or Mike confronting them about this, but they would like to stay as anonymous as possible, which I respect because like I'm not in the business of doxing people.
No, yeah, absolutely.
On this podcast, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm a realtor who has a fucking podcast. Like I'm not, like let's be real. If somebody wants to stay anonymous, I'm going to let them stay anonymous. But I didn't want to, I'm reading all these posts and I didn't want to talk about them if this person was just some dumbass on the internet,
Right.
And so I reached out and I was like, hey, especially, so after that post about the sister, because I can't remember if it was that post or another one, they said something to the effect of like, if the moderators would like information that backs up my claims, like I'm happy to provide that publicly, but like I'm not going to post it on here,
yeah,
right?
okay.
And so I messaged them and I was like, hey, listen, do you have anything that could like back up what you're saying about the sister? And they were like, well, I mean, I don't have anything that like backs up the claims of abuse and, obviously.
Even the sister being alive.
Yes. So that is what they provided to me. Like they provided me enough information that yes, like there's a sister and she's out there.
I mean, that in and of itself
Yeah.
says that the parents are lying as far as the public narrative goes.
Right.
Holy shit.
Again, I talked more to this person and I asked them like how they're connected to the family because from all the posts, like I said earlier, I didn't get the impression that they knew Bryce specifically, but that they did know the family and that is correct. So this person did not know Bryce, had never met Bryce, but they do know Mike very well. However, they do not know Karen. So all of their knowledge and impressions of her come from the family members that they are connected to. So we do need to say that this person's impressions of Karen are based on other people's impressions of her and not direct knowledge. But they say that the stories that they've heard have been confirmed by other people in the family. So there's that. I just want to be very careful with how I present this,
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's a very dicey kind of
It's a very delicate
place
situation
that we're in right now.
Yeah.
But because I spent some time speaking with this person, I'm comfortable talking more about what they have to say. I have the permission to quote part of our personal conversation in which they say what they believe happened to Bryce.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Quote, I suspect he was hanging around in Buttonwillow, waiting for a friend to show up. I think they were coming from a few states away, and he got there early. He had to make it seem like he was bringing the vehicle home, Mike and Karen's vehicle. We suspect they told him to bring the car home immediately, which explains his hesitance to leave Buttonwillow even when the tow truck driver and later the police are hassling him at his parents' request. To get hassled by them was probably the last straw for him. So instead of bringing home their car, he wrecks it and disappears. Probably had a friend with him and they split. End quote.
Okay. I get that. Mm-hmm. And we talked about that. There's still evidence that he was in the car.
Yes.
When
and I don't think this
person
even thinks that he wasn't in the car. Like, I do think that this person believes that Bryce was in the car, though I did not ask them that specifically.
Sure, but that's to be in a car when you wreck it.
Right.
Like that's
in that way.
Yes.
Right.
That's
because like I've been in car accidents, like whatever.
Sure.
But I
Yeah,
mean,
so have
I haven't driven off a cliff.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I have the hang up.
Right.
And I'm not saying this person is wrong. I just, if you're going to that length to plan this out, and the plan is to wreck the car, why would you put yourself in the car?
In that amount of danger.
Yes.
I can see you putting yourself in the car, but not, again, off a cliff.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you're going to drive the car off of a cliff or an embankment or whatever you want to call it, why would you be in the car?
Right.
Why wouldn't you put something, Ferris Bueller, put
put a brick on
put a rock or something on the gas pedal and let it go, and then take the rock off after it crashes if you want to hide that. Putting yourself in the car, and there's strong evidence that he was in the car.
Yeah.
After the crash.
Right.
That's where I have the hang up. I'm not saying this person is wrong.
No. But maybe the person is like 75% correct, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. It was certainly interesting. And so I'm going to go back to one of the things that they said, which was, quote, "We suspect they told him to bring the car home immediately." And so my follow-up question to that was, I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, when do you think that they told him that? Do you think that was the 1 a.m. call? Remember, that 1 a.m. call was the call that Karen says happened, and she talks about in the disappeared episode, but she does not talk about what was said on that call.
Right.
And so this person thinks that likely that's what the 1 a.m. call was get your butt back to Laguna Niguel, give us the car, we are done with this.
That does fit better than my narrative.
Yeah, I mean,
which was that he was afraid to tell them something.
Right.
No, that does. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So this person and I talked more after this, and they revealed some other information that they did not want me to share publicly. It was, as they said, very sensitive information. So what I will say about that is that if you go to Reddit and you read this person's posts about this case and you think, man, this person seems pretty angry, this is accurate. And based on what they told me, I understand where they're coming from. Now, again, I have to say that this person never met Bryce, so they certainly don't have any definitive information on what happened to him after the car accident, but they do not believe that he harmed himself. They do not believe that he decided to take his own life that day. And as of this moment, there's really no hard evidence to say that this person is wrong in that assessment.
That's very true.
In fact, in the years following Bryce's disappearance, many more searches of Castaic Lake have been performed. Around the 2-year anniversary in 2015, Karen posted on the Find Bryce Laspisa Facebook page, quote, "Last week, Mike and I were up at Castaic Lake. We hired a sonar boat that searched for 2 days and did not find any human remains. Our private investigator had a drone operator searching the area north of the boat launch access road. Nothing was found." End quote. Yes, it's a big lake, but 2 days with sonar, in addition to the initial search.
Yeah, and whoever this person is on Reddit, at this point in the investigation, it seems like that's the only viable lead. I don't know whether the detectives working this case have gone into this. Probably not.
Well, and that's the thing. I have no idea. We know that this is not, other than their Reddit post, been discussed publicly. Like, I do know it has not been covered anywhere.
Yeah.
But we don't know what the police know, right? Like, we don't know if maybe Karen did say, okay, yes, Bryce actually did have an escalating drug issue. He got arrested for possessing MDMA in high school, like, blah, 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 blah. Like, the police could know a lot more.
Well, presumably the police would know that.
Well, yes, because juvenile court records are sealed, but when you're the police, you would typically know that, right?
Yeah. Outcomes of juvenile cases are sealed to police. The arrest records are not.
Right. So
the arrest records would have been there. They would have gotten that information before even talking to, when it gets to the detective level, like they would have gotten that information already.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have seen that he had an arrest record for drugs. The outcome of that case would have been blocked from them. And then they would have talked to Karen about that.
Yeah. But like,
hey. Like,
remember how you said this came out of nowhere?
Yeah, except it didn't, because here we have evidence of X, Y, and Z. But the reality is, this Reddit user publicly hasn't come forward until now.
Well, so they originally started posting about this case 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's when they had several posts on the Unresolved Mysteries thread talking basically about how toxic Karen is and how, she and Bryce had this unhealthy relationship and how he did have issues beyond what she was saying publicly. But the whole thing about Bryce having a sister and, all this other stuff, this just came out less than a week ago.
Right. And that's the part that blows my mind, is the sister part.
Yeah, me too.
So, like, look, we're not here to judge how anybody parents. If somebody has a child that goes missing, like, we're not here to judge how they parent.
No, not at all.
To that. However, when you present a public narrative as a parent of a missing person,
right,
and you leave out an entire fucking child, and you present your family life as something different than what it is, there's a problem with that, because it impedes the investigation.
Well, exactly.
That's my issue. It's not so much the social aspect of it, which is what they were doing, is covering their ass. If this is true, it's covering their ass socially. But the problem with that is that it impedes an actual investigation if you are not forthcoming with information, if you truly want your child to be found.
Right. And interestingly, 2 years ago, on that original thread that I was talking about, a lot of people are like, I get the impression that Karen, like, not that she had anything to do with Bryce's disappearance, like, not that she did anything nefarious, but they're like, I really get the impression that she's holding something back, that she's not being completely upfront, whatever. And, I obviously, like, I read that. I'm like, I don't like it when we judge moms in these situations.
Gotta take it with
like,
a grain
I
of
don't
salt.
love that.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I don't like shitty people on the internet.
But
then, today I read this whole other ass sister. Oh, by the way, this person refers to the sister as Bryce's stepsister, or I'm sorry, half sister, because it was his dad, Mike's child from a previous marriage. But that's not exactly accurate, because much like Mike adopted Bryce when Bryce was 2 and became his dad, Karen adopted this girl after her biological mother died when she was 13, and Karen became her mom.
Wow.
So this isn't a situation where, like, you married a guy and he had a child from another marriage and, like, okay, you didn't really have a relationship with them, so why would you bring it up in the disappeared episode? This child came to live with them when she was 13, and Karen adopted her. She was their daughter who lived in their house, who went to the same high school as Bryce. Granted, she's 5 years older than him, so they weren't there at the same time.
Sure, but whatever.
But they both went to Naperville Central High School.
Legacy, yeah.
They were a family of 4. But then when they decided that she had gone off the rails or whatever, they cut her off and basically just stopped acknowledging her publicly. So to me, I'm not interested so much in making judgments about that. But what I am saying is that is extremely relevant information. This is kind of what you were just saying. In a case like this.
Yes. Because it's pertinent information in the investigation of a missing person.
Yeah. Because the public narrative for 8 years has been, this came out of nowhere. He was a happy, well-adjusted kid. We had a great family. We were all very close.
But that's not the case.
Yeah.
And that alters the investigation.
Right.
And it's not, on a detective level, it's not putting blame on the parent. What it does do is it changes the way you investigate things.
Now, to be fair, I do want to say that there's a very good chance that the detectives have known about the sister the entire time.
Probably.
Right?
Probably.
And it could be that this actually didn't materially infect the investigation from that
could
perspective.
Also be true. That could also
However, any missing persons investigation, as we talk about so often, does need public support.
Yes.
It needs people keeping an eye out. It needs people keeping an ear out. It needs people coming forward with information that they may have, no matter how insignificant they think it is. So while there is value in not giving every detail of an investigation to the public,
sure,
the public needs to have a clear enough picture
of what was going on. And potentially why somebody could have walked away.
Yeah. Because, all right, so let's say that I'm somebody who lives in California or whatever, and I've heard about this case, but the prevailing theory from law enforcement is that he took his own life. And what if I see somebody who like kind of looks like him down the street? But I'm like, well, but it can't be him. Like I heard about this case.
He killed himself.
Right.
Right.
I'm not going to call that in.
Agreed.
Why would I? That would seem crazy.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. It changes the narrative of the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And that when I say that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it changes the narrative of how the detectives investigate.
Right.
What it does is it changes the information that is put out to the public. It changes the information that is needed from the public to help the investigation.
Yeah.
And that's where it alters. And somebody saving face publicly or social media wise, great, good for you. But if you want to find out where your kid is, you have to put that information out. As bad as it may seem, as damning as it is to you, you can't hide that. And you don't have to go into detail. You can say, like, we didn't have the best relationship.
Right.
And leave it at that. And leave it as a question mark with the possibility that he walked out on his own to get away from you.
Yeah.
But if you want to find out where he is legitimately, you have to present an accurate picture of potentially why he left. Not why he left, but if he left on his own instead of committing suicide. Because those are the two options. Right now, the prevailing theory is that he committed suicide, but there's evidence clearly, which we just talked about, that he didn't commit suicide, that he walked away.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole other shit that they're hiding from the public narrative. Why?
Yeah, and I'm all for not airing your dirty laundry in public.
Again,
but
you don't have to give every dirty detail.
Yeah.
But you gotta give something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if that's
you're doing the investigation, you're doing your son a disservice if you just present this narrative that everything was fine and he was great.
Everything was white picket fence.
And it came out of nowhere.
Suburban life.
Because
everything was great. And then he just suddenly...
In our very first episode, I compared this case to a slow-moving car crash.
Yes.
And I feel like that's even more true now, because it wasn't just August 28th to August 30th when the actual events took place. This had been going on for years. This had been going on since he was in high school. The signs were there that something was going to happen. He got arrested in high school. He got kicked out of his dorm freshman year of college. There were signs. There were signs that stretched over the course of years. And I'm not saying that that means the parents could have prevented what happened necessarily, but what I am saying is that you cannot present this as something that came out of nowhere.
Right. Yes, exactly. And what it seems like is that whoever this person is providing an actual narrative that retrofitting it makes a whole lot of sense. And what it shows is controlling. It shows the control factor.
Right.
So Karen and Mike have been controlling what information has been presented in the media.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very careful about what information gets out. So we are presented with what information they want out there, not necessarily information about what was actually happening, what was actually occurring, and what the mentality of Bryce may have been at the time. It all kind of fits. It shows that Karen and Mike are really fucking controlling. And again, we don't know.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot of evidence pointing back at them. And their actions do not specifically directly relate to Bryce's disappearance. Kind of. It kind of does. But we're not bringing this up to blame them.
No.
But they are clearly impeding the investigation. That's the problem that I have.
Yeah.
Is that the information that is being put out there is different than what is actually occurring.
This is the case that I originally heard about a few years ago or whatever. And my general theory, not having paid much attention, just knowing the basic facts, was that he probably just decided to take his own life, right? But while there certainly is evidence that points in that direction, that I'm not ignoring, that I think is absolutely valid, there's a lot of evidence that, doesn't point. And that sonar, that 2-day sonar search from 2015 that I mentioned, to my knowledge, it was the last major search of the area. But in the intervening years, and again, we're coming up on the 8th anniversary in a few weeks, no further trace of Bryce has been found in that area. And one thing that I found interesting that I hadn't seen reported elsewhere came from an interview that Bryce's roommate Sean gave to Fox 40 less than a week after Bryce's disappearance. In it, Sean said that the last night he saw Bryce, that night that he went to Kim's house, presumably to end their relationship in person, Bryce wasn't planning on coming back to the apartment after. He packed that duffel bag with a few essentials, and according to Sean, quote, he told us he would come back on Labor Day, end quote. To me, it's easy to look at the sudden breakup and his other actions, the giving away the expensive possessions, leaving behind his TV, most of his clothes, et cetera, as signs that he was going to take his own life. But I can also see it as he breaks up with his girlfriend. He gives away these possessions that were bought by his parents or gifted to him by his parents, not because he was going to take his own life, but because he wasn't coming back to this one. And even though he told his roommate Sean that he was going to be back on Labor Day, and even though he was driving toward Laguna Niguel, Bryce apparently hadn't made any plans with his parents to visit that weekend. According to everything that his parents had said, they assumed he was going back to his apartment after Kim's house. But he had already packed before he even left. He had already decided he wasn't going back to that apartment, one way or the other. Now in 2021, with little hard evidence of what actually happened to Bryce, all we're left with is speculation. Police believe that he took his own life and reclassified his case to voluntarily missing. But Bryce's parents still hold out hope that he's out there somewhere. And the person I spoke to tonight also thinks that Bryce is out there, but that he knows exactly who he is, but decided that's not who he wanted to be any longer. There have been multiple potential sightings of Bryce over the years, both in California and in Oregon, with the latest one being in May of 2021, but none have been substantiated. What we do know is that Bryce's fingerprints and DNA are loaded into NamUs, so if he did survive that day at Castaic Lake, it's likely that he is still out there somewhere, living his life in whatever form that may take. Bryce David Laspisa has been missing from Castaic, California since August 30th, 2013. He was 5'11" and 170 pounds. He has red hair and blue eyes. He has a tattoo of a Taurus bullhead and his birthday in Roman numerals on his upper left arm and pierced ears. Bryce was 19 years old when he went missing. He would be 27 today. If you have any information on Bryce Laspisa's disappearance, please call the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office at 323-890-5500. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheyweregone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, And Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATZWG Pod on Instagram and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we are actually going to be taking next week off for a little vacation, but we will see you the week after that for a brand new episode.
See you then.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. Our research, writing, and editing is done by Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is the Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!